Welcome back to the garden here in Raleigh, North Carolina, Zone 7B. We have had rain or drizzle at least for the last 3 days. And I tell you what, rain hits different than any other type of irrigation you're gonna do. If you're watering with drip irrigation or overhead irrigation or how your plants are getting water, rain does something different. I had a nursery for 20 some years, and when it rained, in the summertime especially, when we had warmer nights and warm days, the plants would just go kind of wild. But with that said, it will expose potentially a couple of problems in your garden. One of those is weeds, because not only are your plants going to grow super fast from rainwater, the weeds are too. So if you had small weeds out there, all of a sudden you're going to see them go, this big. So be on top of that for sure. The other thing it may expose is some of your plants that may have put on a lot of growth, but have not really developed any strength to hold those leaves and branches up. So this Loropetalum got pruned, and it's grown so much, and it's kind of very wispy growth up here that it's weeping over. And you can see that, the weight of the rain pulling it over. The rain didn't do any damage to it, but if I'd have combined that with maybe a 30, 40 mile an hour wind and the weight of that water on them, potentially this plant could be in trouble. And we're going to show you several things in the garden that are weeping over like this so much that I'm thinking that maybe I'll go in here and do a little bit of lightening of the load on the ends of these branches over the next couple of weeks. Just give them a bit of a haircut, and again, hopefully strengthen up some of this wood, because we'll get storms during the summertime that could potentially do much worse than just pull them down with the weight of the water. It could just destroy them. Got all my string and string levels out here, started digging out the patio, got about halfway through it, and again, it's rained for the last 3 or 4 days, and it's prevented me from getting the rest of this dug out. But the patio is in the process of coming together. It won't take long once I get a few sunny days, and we're continuing to have days in like the low 80s, which is completely wild for this. I mean, almost June. Normally we're touching 90 almost every day at this point, and the nighttime temperature is even cooler, which is welcomed. We've got containers all over the place. You'll see this. A lot of them are going to be integrated into the patio or into the beds once we get this thing finished. Just trying to keep them out of the way until then. The Dear Dolores hydrangea has probably reached peak back here. Just great color against that hosta that we showed last week. One question I have for you guys as we bounce around the garden and show you a few views of it. Are you interested in a very thorough tour? I think it was 2 years ago, we did like a 5-part tour and named all the plants out here. And I didn't want to do that last year, so I just kind of did weekly tours where we bounced around and showed off maybe a problem here or, something that was great there. A lot of things have been planted out here that you guys haven't seen. Not a lot, but there's definitely a few things that have gone in the ground. There's a dwarf pomegranate out here we've never talked about, several things. But just, are you interested in a detailed tour where I would just do the detailed tour of the front and a detailed tour of the back? It would be a fairly long video. There are a lot of things back here. If not, that's fine. We'll just do these kind of bounce around what looks good every week videos. But I'm just curious if you want a more detailed video. The big garden redesign for the season was the vegetable garden. We had all these dahlias over on the other side of the vegetable garden, and they get 6 feet tall every year. And we can, again, keep them a little smaller, but I kind of like the size of them. And they were on that side of the vegetable garden. So the vegetable garden was just kind of a thing that was just hidden back here and wasn't part of the garden. Now on that side is just dwarf shrubs. There's a couple more things going in there actually that in the next few days. And the herbs, and then the vegetables are here, and now the dahlias are on the back row. They've already reached the top of the chain link fence, and they'll end up this tall. They'll be tied back to the fence this week, and that'll keep them from flopping over into this space. But you can see we're starting to get flowers on them. When we moved these dahlias, there were a couple of seedling dahlias that we have crosses out here where we have collected the seed and then germinated the seed, planted them and grown them out for a couple years. And we have some interesting ones out here. And when you're moving them and you don't remember what was coming up over there, we didn't know whether we had lost any ones that we really liked. But there's a really spidery red one that we saw the first flower on the day before yesterday. The flower's falling apart now, but it survived. So a couple of them that we really were like, I'm hoping we found the right ones to move back here, are looking pretty good. The tomatoes are, a little over halfway up the cages. There's a fence on the back and goes all the way around this circle that's about to come down. We have so many rabbits over here, they'll eat all of our cool season vegetables. We are trying to eat our cool season vegetables as fast as possible. We're having salads. It's two a day salads right now because I'm guessing that at some point we are going to break this and get 90-degree weather, and all of this leafy evergreens will be gone. But in the meantime, still producing like crazy out here, and we're taking advantage of that. But again, it's slowing the tomatoes down, slowing the peppers down, slowing the warm season things down. So it's a little thin out here because of that, but we're still getting lots of food out of here. We put up 2 container planting videos this season. One was new containers that we had gotten from Michael Carr this season. That's some of the ones you saw on the other side that are on the edge of that bed waiting to go onto the patio. And then one refreshing older containers. I got to come back and give Steph just full credit on this container. The colors of this are going to be absolutely fantastic. This Dusty Miller and the polka dot plant, this variegated sage, this sweet potato vine, and this black foliage crepe myrtle are just fantastic together. It's still all small, but I think you can get an idea of how that's actually going to look against the color of that container. So I really think this, so far to me, this is the winner of the combos. Somebody had asked in that video, the crepe myrtle needs a lot of sun, especially to keep this black foliage. That's another thing. Not only does it need sun for flowering, it also needs, these dark foliage things sometimes need sun just to keep their dark foliage. And the Dusty Miller needs sun. The sage could definitely use some sun, but the polka dot plant typically needs a little bit of shade. This garden is kind of interesting. I think if you came here and you said, well, that plant needs sun and that plant needs shade, how are they next to each other? We don't really have, other than the vegetable garden over there, we don't have an area in this garden that gets 15 hours of direct sun. We have good mixed light. We typically plant things pretty close together so that the sun's not going to blast the roots on that polka dot plant. It's going to be infilled. It's the same thing on the ground out here in the garden. Things are shading each other's roots. A lot of times it's the roots being shaded. This red bud that's back here behind me, this isn't a great example of a red bud. I mean, it's not what you would find out in the woods, but when you see red buds and you see native dogwoods, we call them shade trees. What they really want is their roots shaded. So when you're driving down Interstate 40, runs through Raleigh, runs across the whole state of North Carolina all the way to California. When you drive along 40 and you see dogwoods and you see red buds, you're seeing them on the edge of the woods. So basically, they've decided that their roots are protected by the shade of the trees, but then they put their foliage out in the full sun. So a lot of things it's raining on us while we're doing this. A lot of things that aren't necessarily in need of shade as much as they are their roots being shaded. The big fight we've actually had in this garden over the last 3 years has been this back line. It's really between the roots on the large trees that are on the property behind us and the soil going from a heavy clay soil that you would expect everywhere here to some sand as it gets back into this area. I guess something was pushed back here at some point. It's been really hard to water this space, but finally, everything that's back here is flushing out and looking pretty solid. I don't think we'll have to do as much watering back here. This is a camellia that I had grown at my nursery that is going to overgrow the space that it's in, so it's going to have to move in some way back further back at some point. But the rest of the path looks pretty good. There's a dwarf plum yew going in along this bed, and a couple things will be rearranged. That's one of the best dry shade plants there are. We don't have one with this dry shade condition. I always talk about that plant in every dry shade garden tour we do. We're finally putting one in here. Somebody had asked, I hadn't shown the Farfugium in any tour so far this season. Back in December, they got knocked back to the ground pretty hard. I've run over this one a little bit on the edge right here with my wheelbarrow, mulching this past couple of weeks. This one looks pretty good. Something's been chewing on the leaves a bit. I don't really care. Something is enjoying it. Actually looks like a leaf cutter bee when you see chunks taken out of the edge like that. A lot of times that's a leaf cutter bee using it to line their hole they've drilled in something somewhere. So don't mind that. And then the other one, which people call tractor seat plant typically, the gigantic variety. This one will get this big. The leaves will get substantially larger as the season goes on. These don't bloom until the fall. We had gotten 3 more of these. There are a lot of named cultivars of Farfugium, and they're all hardy here in my areas in Zone 7B, 8A. We have 3 that didn't come back, and it wasn't just the December freeze. It was really, I planted them in the fall. And I talk about this, I talk about these things on the channel. Don't plant marginal things in the fall because they won't come back. And guess what we did? We've got 3 down in South Carolina at a garden center. We were down there doing something else, brought them up here, planted them, and of course we did it in the fall, and then that December freeze didn't just melt them to the ground like it did the 2 that had been here for a while. These just came right back out. It killed them. So there's a lesson learned over and over. I've done it a few times here, and again, it's one of those things, I say it all the time, and then I don't always follow through on it here in the garden. But definitely, if it's a marginal plant, we should have just kept those 3 Farfugium, brought them in and out through the winter, planted them this spring, and they would have been absolutely fine. Again, lesson learned on something I already knew. So again, with this rain, we can noticeably see the difference in just 3 days in the annual borders, the perennials, pops of color everywhere, and lots of fresh new growth on them. This Golden Jubilee Agastache just continues to be a standout here in the garden. It seems to be really very winter hardy. Again, I've talked about some of the Agastache not coming back every year, but this one has been super reliable. There's a couple more in the front garden I'll show you in just a minute, but that purple flower that's coming on top of this gold foliage just is just amazing. Lots of agapanthus to show off. If we did a tour back here 2 weeks from now and did a more thorough tour, we'll name some of these agapanthus, and they should be in full flower in about 2 weeks. One of the weekly tour videos last year, I limbed up this Vitex into a tree, and it put on a ton of growth toward the end of the season last year. And I came back in and I cleaned up the bottom of it, but I didn't do any cutback on the growth that had come from last year. So this is another example of, this is water weight pulling these limbs down. And you can imagine that water was fine, but if you'd have combined that with a 30, 40 mile an hour wind, I would imagine I would have had some cracking and some limbs broken on this Vitex. I'm a little torn on this because there's flowers coming, and I think it'll be in full flower here in the next 2 or 3 weeks. But if I had some sort, I'm a little, I think it'll rebloom. These bloom on new growth if I cut it now, but I wish I'd have cut it earlier in the season. I wish I'd just been paying attention to the fact that not only did the bottom of the tree need to be cleaned up, but it had 6 feet of new growth on it from last season that was very spindly. And now the weight of the leaves and the weight of these flowers coming has pulled it down. It's in jeopardy of being damaged. I could probably figure out a way to help stake it up some. I think I'm just going to let this one bloom, just roll with it. But normally, this is one of those that I wish I'd have done a little bit of work on during the winter time. St. John's wort on the other side of the driveway is starting to put on a few flowers. These flowers are so interesting. This is not the most floriferous plant. It's not going to have a ton of flowers on it, but the flowers they do have are wildly intricate, and the bees go bananas on them. The native bees get on these and they just do weird circles on the flowers from flower to flower to flower to flower. It's almost like it makes them drunk in some way. And they'll spend a lot of time on them, and just they get faster and faster and faster on these flowers. Next up on the It Needs a Haircut is the Amelanchier, or the serviceberry. In the front garden, you can see how that rain has pulled those limbs down a bit up at the top, which is normal. You're going to get some weeping things in the garden when it rains, but this one is so spindly, it's definitely going to need a haircut. So I'm going to go up there in the next week or so and cut this back again. This is the second year in a row that I've known that if I don't keep this thing pruned down just a bit and allow the trunk to really catch up, it's never going to be unstaked. I'm going to have it staked forever and ever and ever if I don't get some thickness on this trunk before I let all this growth happen on the top. Another thing with the rain, the giant zinnias have just exploded here in the last day or so, and they've got buds on the top of them. I think by the next weeks, if we were doing another tour out here in the next couple of weeks, we'll see flowers on all the giant zinnias. The lantanas that came back from last year have their first blooms. We have a couple other lantana out here that have flowers on them, but they came out of a greenhouse. But the ones that were here, went to sleep, came back up, are starting to flower now. We have happy bees out here in the front garden. You'll notice that top piece is not painted. It went on in kind of an emergency. The bees decided to split their group all of a sudden. I think it got slightly overcrowded. I was out of town and we needed to in a scramble, another beekeeper from Raleigh who was very experienced came over and put the top on it there for me. I'm not going to talk too much about the bees out here. At some point I will, but I don't know any. I have a very limited knowledge. I'm learning, trying to be, the best beekeeper I can be for these bees. But I have friends who are master beekeepers, and so that's I rely on them for advice. I don't want to. Their lives are not in my hands. I'm putting them in people who know a lot more than we do. As we learn how to keep them, we are going to at some point move this to a spot in the back garden that we've picked out. Annuals just exploded in the last few days. They're absolutely exploding with growth. Again, your weeds can explode with growth too. So we've got some weeds here or there that were this big, a week ago, and you get rain on them for a few days and they just go, really, really quickly. Everything is trying to fill in any space it can get so it gets the sunlight the rest of the summer and can make all the seed it can. And whether that's your weeds or your annual plants, equally trying to garner space out here. The old azaleas on the front foundation are about to come out. I'm going to try to dig them up where we can put them on the neighborhood Facebook group and give them away. They're perfect. They can definitely be rehomed by someone. There's a little cinder block wall down below it that's going to come out. It was put in a long, long time ago. And then this bed will just be a solid bed leading up to the house. The house repairs, the new siding, and all the changes that are going to happen to the house and the front porch are going to be in July now. The road is being repaved, and we got the notice of when they're going to do that. And so because the road is being repaved, I didn't want these guys here at the exact same time and blah, blah, blah. But anyway, all the house stuff is going to happen right around the middle of July. Hopefully that'll take place pretty quickly. I'm going to get these azaleas out of their way. In the meantime, we have a garden that we're going to have people out here working in. So it's slightly stressful because there are a few plants out here. I mean, a lot of these, if somebody steps on something and it's gone, it's gone. There's a few things out here though that are one of a kinds and that kind of thing. So we would definitely want to make sure we're protecting those things. By getting these azaleas out and giving them a place to work out here, they're going to hopefully do less damage than they would otherwise. But again, those big old giant azaleas that have been there who knows how long, long time. We'll see how easy they are to get out of the ground soon. We got our first flowers on Monarda this week, on our native coneflowers, our kind of non-named cultivar coneflowers. The goldfinches are already on them. It's weird, they're pulling the seeds out with aggression out of the middle of them. Usually they come after the flowers are spent and easily access the seeds, but for some reason they are hungry and ready to get to it this season. The pineapple lily's super interesting. Right now it's kind of standing up tall. During sunny days, that thing actually splays open. I thought it had a problem for a few days, but it turns out that thing splays open to get as much sunlight into the center of it as it can. And then it closes up like that in the evening, which is really kind of interesting. All the dwarf zinnias are well underway. We showed the giant zinnias don't have flowers yet, the ones that get 3 and 4 feet tall, but all the lower growing zinnias do. This is that double raspberry ripple. These just look so good out here last year. Caryopteris, again, has flowers on it super, super early. Again, I consider these late summer, early fall blooming shrubs, but it did this last year. It started blooming right at the end of spring and bloomed right through fall and then kind of peaked in the fall, but it really bloomed all summer long last year. It looks great with this gold agastache again, the Golden Jubilee, same one that was in the back garden. Again, it's starting to put out some of that purple flowering that it does on that gold foliage. This combo to me just looks great every year. You can see the dogwood, again, suffering the same thing as the Amelanchier and the Vitex and the Loropetalum that's in the back garden. The weight is pulling it down, and last year we did not get this thing pruned in time, or we didn't prune it. We just didn't recognize, we saw every time it rained the water was splitting it open. Eventually one got it, and so as soon as this thing slows down on flowering and it's not as showy as it is right now, I've got to do a little bit of pruning on this thing to reduce the amount of leaf surface that I have on this tree slow it down a bit, allow the branches to thicken up some. Otherwise, this thing's going to one day just split right in half. So does this look like a catcher's mitt to you guys, or does it look like a kid's turkey, a Thanksgiving turkey, how they draw them, you know, around their fingers? You know, what does the shape of this tree remind you of? It's really kind of funny, but it look, when you stand back, it does look like a mitt with the thumb sticking out over here on the side. Again, this thing is just, all of this is, it's beautiful, but it's very, this is a lot of weight, and that stem is only, you know, 3/4 of an inch around, something like that. That's all that's holding all that flower weight and all that leaf weight up and all that water weight this morning. Another thing out here in the front is, because we knew work was coming on the house at some point, we've got a couple things we're gonna have to rearrange after it's done. So the azaleas come out, that little wall comes out. This Snow Joey viburnum has just been kind of held in place. It's gonna back up some at that point, and we'll probably limb it up into a bit of a tree form. I don't really want to be doing a lot of top pruning on this plant because it blooms in the spring, and then you get beautiful berries on this in the fall that the birds like. But if I'm constantly pruning from the top and trying to keep it down as a small shrub, we're never going to see the berries on it. So what we're going to do is just limb it up into a small tree, like we've done so many things out here. We're limbing things up so we can tuck things up under them. But there'll be some plant rearranging out here in the front garden once this work is done, hopefully by August, or, you know, mid-August, you know, when all this foot traffic that's going to be in the garden is over with. We'll get those jobs done at that time. So thank you guys very much for following along. Again, let me know down below whether you want a really thorough tour with all the names of the plants that are out here. Again, some things are, you know, one-of-a-kind things that you're not going to be able to find anywhere, but a lot of it's, you know, interesting pieces that I think you could locate if you wanted to and add to your garden. Thanks for watching.